One of the issues that was alluded to in your first talk today, and also in the introduction by Mark Littlewood, is the whole question, very topic at the moment, of free speech on campus. We've got a very strong panel here of people who, in one way or another, have been both thinking about this kind of issue and involved in it. And we're going to start off with Eric Kaufmann from Birkbeck College. He has a book out recently, by the way, which I strongly recommend, and you should buy it if you haven't done so already. But without any further ado, over to you, Eric.
Thanks very much. Should we stand up, maybe?
Yeah, if you want to, whatever you feel comfortable.
Okay, all right. Great, delighted to be here. I just want to try and connect with a bit of what Deirdre was talking about this morning. And really, when you think about free markets and socialism, it's a question of a trade-off between economic equality, say for the working class and the poor, and economic freedom. And in a way, you need to allow economic freedom to grow the pie, but you also have to have some redistribution. But the question I want to pose to you today is, what about the cultural picture? Cultural equality versus cultural freedom. And I think that's really the key issue today. Because I think when it comes to cultural egalitarianism, we are kind of where economic egalitarianism was, say, in 1917 with the Russian Revolution. So we've had an almost complete victory of cultural egalitarianism over competing ideas of, say, cultural liberty, reason, community. So I want to pose this issue as a trade-off. We do need cultural equality. We absolutely, especially when we think about race, sex, and gender, which are kind of the sacred categories for this new cultural egalitarianism. It's important to note that a lot of good things were done that improved the lot of cultural minorities, disadvantaged groups. But the question is, when does this go too far? It's the same question as when does redistribution go too far? So I'll give you a question. How sensitive should we be to minority, race, sex, and gender groups? That's a question. Must we be completely sensitive? Or is there a trade-off between sensitivity and freedom of speech? So I think we would all agree that we shouldn't go around calling people racial slurs. So that's clearly we're willing to restrict our freedom of speech in the name of sensitivity when it comes to racial slurs. But what about using a term like blackboard? Or what about not wearing a Chinese prom dress? Or putting the American flag on a pair of sneakers? Is that also racism equivalent to making a racial slur? So you see what's going on here is if we take sensitivity, if we minister to the most sensitive individual imaginable in one of these sacred protected categories of race, sex, and gender minorities, then we have to muzzle freedom of expression to the extent of outlawing terms such as blackboard. And so really this is a question of a trade-off, and I think we've gone far, far too far, and we need something like what we had with the economy, which is moving back from extreme egalitarianism in the name of socialism to something in the middle, which is a mix of capitalism and socialism. Free market, but with a welfare state as well. The second thing I want to talk about is this issue of black and white thinking versus complexity or shades of gray. Is the world black and white, that there are good people and bad people? There are racist and deplorable xenophobes and good people? Or is it actually more complicated than that? I think that's a very important point, because if you see the world in religious terms, that somebody who is insensitive in any way to one of the sacred protected categories, therefore we have to bring the full wrath of society down on them. They must be excommunicated forever, but banned from public life, lose their job. If you have that very religious point of view, you think the sacred has been profaned, and that's the way you look at the world. If, however, you say, actually, we've got to come into a working arrangement here, we've got to have a mix of freedom of expression and a mix of cultural sensitivity to minorities, and maybe we have to, yes, talk about being sensitive, but we also have to talk about strengthening, increasing the resilience of disadvantaged groups as well, because I think that could be a win-win situation. So I'm going to just, with these very brief thoughts, I'm going to leave it right there and hand it over to Joanna.
Hello, I'm really grateful to the IEA for organising the event today, and it's always a pleasure to speak on a panel alongside Toby and Eric. But at risk of sounding kind of like I've woken up in a really depressed state of mind, it also feels like a bit of a failing that I'm here today as well. And the thing I've been asking myself on the train coming up here is why, after 5 years through Spiked, through the book I wrote on academic freedom, why have I failed to win the argument? Why are we still talking about free speech on campus? Why is censorship, why are no platformings still occurring on a regular basis? Why haven't I won is the kind of foot-stamping question. And obviously that's not just me who's fighting this battle. It's other people on the panel here and other people, as I'm sure you're aware of, who are making the case for free speech. So why is it? Why have we not made the case for free speech so successfully? Now, I'm sure there are lots of answers to this question, and in the Q&A, I'd be really keen to hear what you think. Why have we not won the argument for free speech on campus? I just want to throw out one idea today about why I think we haven't won this argument. And I think at heart, censorship is very, very attractive. And I think we have to recognize that fact. If there's a difficult argument, you think you might not be able to win that argument, if there's something that you find offensive, and we can laugh about snowflake students, but I'm sure everybody here, if you examine your conscience, everybody has that one thing that they find really provokes them, really outrages them, that they just wish would go away. It might be a person, it might be an argument, it might be whatever it is. You just wish somebody would take that and make it go away. So it kind of makes me think this time last week, I was sat on Broadstairs Beach, if you remember, it was really, really hot last Saturday, with my daughter, she's 13, and just bizarre beach conversation with your daughter. She said to me, "Mum, what would I need to do that was so bad you would throw me out of the house?" So I can't think of anything. She said, "Oh, what if I got a tattoo? Would you throw me out if I got a tattoo?" I said, "No, I think you were really stupid, but I wouldn't throw you out. I would still let you live in my house." "Or what about if I took drugs? Would you throw me out if I took drugs?" I said, "No, again, I think you were really stupid, but I would still let you live in my house if you took drugs." She said, "Come on, there must be something. What is it I would have to do that would be so bad you would throw me out?" I said, "Well, I suppose if you joined Extinction Rebellion, then I would seriously have my qualms about letting you stay living with me." But the point I'm making is that everybody has that one group, that one thing that we wish would go away. And I think this becomes especially attractive if we can dress censorship up not as censorship, but as its opposite. And I think this is what the left on campus do so successfully. So they never come out and say, "You know what, we're really, really pro-censorship." They say the opposite. They say, "Do you know what, we're really pro-free speech." And what that means is we need to shut up powerful people on campus. We need to stop white men from speaking so we can elevate other voices and level up the playing field. So this is a pro-free speech argument. Yes, being pro-free speech means banning some people from coming onto campus, but I think unless we recognize what's attractive about this argument and the allure of being able to present being pro-censorship as being pro-free speech, we will never win. And I think the other side of this, and this will be my final point, I think we have a blind spot. Even people who are pro-free speech often have a blind spot. This one issue, like I say, for me, it would be Extinction Rebellion, where they do want to crack the whip. So if we look at the prevent duty in universities, the left will be very, very opposed to the prevent duty. But yet, on the other side, people who are pro-free speech often prefer to poke the finger at snowflake students and don't actually take up what's so bad about the prevent duty. We need to recognize that both of these things have an impact on what's going on in campus. We have government ministers, or kind of ex-government ministers now, like Sam Gamir, when he was Secretary of State for Universities, wanting to ban banning. And your first instinct is, oh yeah, this is great, okay, victory for my side, victory for the free speech side. Then you think, really? We want a government minister having this power over universities, over students, where he can say, no, this is not not acceptable. I will say what you can and can't talk about on campus. I will say you can't have Muslim preachers coming in because that falls under the remit of the prevent duty, but you must have Jermaine Greer because I'm going to ban you banning people. So I think we can only win the case for free speech if we really understand that this must occur in all instances. We must be free speech absolutist. Joe Brand must be allowed to make jokes about throwing battery acid, however distasteful we might find those jokes. People must be allowed in America to burn the US flag, however distasteful people might find it. You can't win the argument for free speech if you're going to have a blind spot for arguments that you personally find distasteful. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you to the IEA. Great inspiring speech from Deirdre McCluskey. And as Joanna said, I am as honored as she is to be sharing a panel with these fantastic folks. I don't think anyone in this room probably would disagree that we're in the midst of a free speech crisis, not just at universities. The other day, a guy was fired from ASDA for posting a clip of Billy Connolly attacking religion. The whole corporate sector, as I'm sure you're aware, has wholeheartly embraced the kind of woke politics of university campuses. And not just companies like Google and Facebook and Apple and Microsoft, but Procter & Gamble, the whole panoply of the corporate world alongside the media and higher education, and in fact, schools as well, have been completely captured by this authoritarian, illiberal, woke, quasi-religious cult. So we need to do something about it. What can we do about it? What practical things can we do? I've been thinking about that. Neil Ferguson, a few months ago, wrote a piece in the Sunday Times saying that what we needed to do was to form a NATO of the pen, whereby maverick intellectuals, journalists, opinion writers, people who earned their living through writing, mainly involved in the expression of ideas, formed an alliance whereby they agreed between themselves that an attack on one would be regarded as an attack on all. This was the way to defend freedom. It worked in Europe during the Soviet era, and it would work now. And I thought that was a great idea, and I've been thinking about how to operationalize that. And I thought I'd just share a few brief thoughts with you about how I think that could be done. The problem with the NATO analogy is it wasn't clear, at least in the way Neil originally expressed this, what the mechanism would be to overcome the collective action problem. So if an intellectual who is a member of this alliance says something that offends a particular group of people, and he then starts getting mobbed on social media, put through a disciplinary process in his academic institution, the usual torture. You'd rely on another member of this alliance standing up, putting their head above the parapet, at which point they would be attacked. And there needs to be, I think, some kind of more impersonal mechanism to ensure that collective action can be taken, just as NATO worked, because no individual country had to make the first move in standing up to Soviet aggression in Western Europe, but they would respond collectively. And I think the apposite Cold War analogy is less with NATO and more with Solidarity, the Polish trade union formed in the Gdansk shipyard in 1980. And part of the purpose of Solidarity was to provide not just members of the unions in the shipyards, but across Poland, union members with protection of their free speech. They could criticize the communist regime without jeopardizing their livelihoods, without risking losing their jobs, being thrown in jail. So it was, and in its original charter, it talked about the importance of freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. So I think what we need to do is form a free speech trade union. What I have in mind is something that would be open to academics, public intellectuals, opinion writers, pundits, playwrights, poets, comedians, and they would join what would essentially be a mass membership organization, and in the event of any of them being attacked in the ways I've described, for speaking out of school, for saying something that challenged the prevailing progressive orthodoxy, the organization would come to their defense. Now, by that I don't mean that it would pay for defamation lawyers or employment lawyers. I think, to begin with at least, it would just be able to put them in touch with an approved list of defamation specialists and employment specialists, also give them PR advice, some advice on how to navigate the disciplinary process they're being put through, if they are being put through one. But I think critically it would provide them with a kind of support network, a group of people who've been through something similar, who sympathize with them. I know from having been mobbed myself at the beginning of last year, that one of the most difficult things about it is the sense of social isolation, the feeling that you are a pariah. In my case, it wasn't as bad as it has been for some other people. Most of my friends were pretty good, stood up for me, stood by me. But some people who find themselves being mobbed, particularly if they are academics, suddenly find themselves on their own. In some cases, their friends turn on them, their colleagues that they've known and worked with for the past 20 years turn on them, and that can be an incredibly demoralizing, isolating experience, and in some cases, it has led to people committing suicide. There have been at least a dozen cases of people who've committed suicide as a result of being mobbed, gone after by outrage mobs, hunted on social media. So I think a critical role that this organization could perform would be to provide a network of psychological support so people who find themselves in that position don't feel that they're fighting that battle on their own. And there is an organization a bit like this in America called the National Association of Scholars, which is my model. And I've been talking to the guy that runs that, and he's been very helpful in giving some advice. The National Association of Scholars has a reputation for being conservative. And I've been debating whether this particular free speech trade union I have in mind should have a kind of conservative identity. Should it position itself as a classically liberal or conservative organization? And I don't think it should. I haven't completely decided, but I don't think it should. And one reason is that it's not just male, pale, and stale conservatives like me who face the wrath of outrage mobs on Twitter if they say the wrong thing. There are all sorts of other people, liberals who haven't completely embraced the kind of postmodernist, neo-Marxist Kool-Aid, who suddenly find themselves isolated from their colleagues, quite often get mobbed too. Most recently, gender-critical feminists in this country. Kathleen Stock, a gender-critical feminist, a professor of philosophy at Sussex University, organized a letter she wrote to the Sunday Times, pointing out that Stonewall's LGBT guidance, particularly with respect to the T part, was very restrictive of what academics can say in universities, and many, if not most, British universities have embraced this guidance, and they've embraced the policies recommended by Stonewall, and that has meant a very intellectually stifling atmosphere for gender-critical feminists on campus. She wrote this letter, 30 people signed it in the Sunday Times. Since that letter was published, lots of the signatories have themselves been mobbed. They've been told that they either have to recant what was in the letter or stand down from the editorial boards of journals they're involved with, or stop editing journals, and so on and so forth. So there is the main trade union in the academy, the University of, I think it's called the UCU, it has recently been completely captured by people who have sided with the trans lobby in their battle on campus with gender-critical feminists. So in effect, an entire generation of feminists have been disowned by the largest academic trade union in this country. They are effectively homeless. So I like the idea of creating a kind of arc which wasn't just for people like for people like me, but embraced a coalition of people who feel their free speech is under assault. Anyway, I won't go on for any longer, but if you're interested in getting involved, in discussing this with me, we can talk in a second, but I'm writing something for Quillette, where I work as an associate editor, about this next week, and please email me, toby@quillette.com if you like this idea and want to get involved. Thanks.